Hi, good morning everybody. Matt Zerby here with Wasco Nursery, and welcome to another Saturday morning episode of Coffee Chat with Matt. As always, I'm glad that you're here with me this morning. We're getting here towards the end of August, and if you remember from last week, we talked a bit about adding color to the garden, color and interest, aside from the normal mums and maples and things like that. But if you remember, I said don't give up on the garden yet. There's a lot of stuff to do at this time of year, and although maybe you're a little like me and I'm kind of towards the end of or towards the process of giving up on some of my spring planted annual containers that are now overgrown, root bound, and maybe just a little neglected on my part. About this time of year I start to give up on some of those things because the season is almost over, and it's okay to do that. But in terms of the landscape, there's still a lot going on. So I just have a few different sort of themes or topics that I wanted to talk about. Fall planting in general, bulbs, seed collection, watering, a couple other things like that. So I kind of have a list of things that I wanted to talk about, but I also wanted to open it up to questions. So Megan is here with me this morning, and she is on the back end there. And so if you have any questions, she'll be answering some of those, but also pose those for me. I'll try and answer them on the fly as we go through here. So, and then I'm going to briefly touch today on pruning, because there's a few things that it's a good time of year to prune right now. But as I mentioned last week, I will have we'll do a coffee chat with Matt. I'm actually probably going to do it both in person live here. We'll actually probably go out into the nursery fields, and we'll shoot the coffee chat with Matt live video with a quote unquote live studio audience. So we'll probably have a handful of slots open for people that want to come and participate and watch in person, and then we'll also do it live on Facebook, just like our normal format. So that'll be coming up in probably two or 3 weeks, probably just right after Labor Day, whatever that Saturday is. But we'll get that on the calendar and get an event put out there so that you all can participate if you want to. So yeah, so let's jump in. I brought a few things up here. Let's talk about houseplants first. I know that seems weird to be talking about houseplants right now, but this is actually the time of year when, as my grandma would say, an ounce of prevention prevents a pound of whatever, a pound of cure. And so here we are in late August. We're thinking here in another month or so, late September, we need to start bringing our houseplants in if they've been outside. So if you're anything like me, I've got a lot of houseplants, tropical plants, things like that. I like to move them out to the patio. They do great outside on the front porch and a lot of different places in my home. And then when we get towards those cold nights, it's time to start bringing those in. So, end of September there is usually when we have to start doing that. But right now is the time that we should be doing a couple of things. So I brought a jade over here. This is actually a cutting that we took from a larger jade a while back. So I've got this nice jade tree right here. You can kind of see this nice woody stem. And this year it's been putting on all sorts of nice new growth. Well, this is the time of year that you can propagate jade. They actually propagate pretty well year round. But winter time isn't ideal. We've got a lot of nice new growth on here. So this is a wonderful time if you want to take a few cuttings off of a jade. The days are still long enough that they're going to root in pretty quickly, and you can still do all of this outside if you want. So this is just a simple jade cutting right here that's already rooted in. Jade are an exceptionally easy plant to propagate. So you're literally just going to take a couple of cuttings. So like even on this one right here, we'll just take one little cutting from over here on this back side. So I'm taking this little cutting. I'm going to pick off these bottom leaves right down here. So all I'm left with is this right here. I'm going to leave this sit out for about 2 days, and the end, that fresh cut right there, is going to callus over. It's going to just dry up a tiny bit, and it's going to callus over. And once that callus is over, we can stick that into a mixture of peat and sand, or peat, any typical houseplant mix would work great. And that's it. That's literally all there is to it. And there's a lot of houseplants that you can do that with. So this is still a really good time of year if you want to do some of those, because the days are long enough that it's still going to encourage rooting and growth at this time of year. So a little bit about propagating there. But as far as houseplants go, this is also the time of year when you want to do some investigation for insect issues. So jade, this particular jade looks really good and healthy, but one of the things that I would like to do is go through there, start looking for evidence of things like scale or mealybugs or whiteflies or aphids, all of those types of things. The reason that I want to look at those right now is twofold. One, it's still warm enough that I could apply a chemical product to the plant outside before I bring it in. If you bring your plant in and it's cold outside and you develop an insect problem over the winter, the number of products that you can use inside and their efficacy is like very, very minimal compared to the things you can use outside, especially on hard to control insects like mealybug or scale. So looking for those right now is an excellent thing to do. I'm not going to run through all of the different treatment options at this time of year, but most insects, aphids, whiteflies, things like that can be controlled with 8, which is this product right here. It's a pretty safe product. It's technically not organic, but it's a synthetic product that's derived from a natural substance. So that works out really well. That's 8. It's also safe for fruits and vegetables. It is not systemic, so this is not going to get absorbed into the plant. It is not going to get absorbed into fruits or vegetables. So that's a good product for your aphids, whiteflies, a lot of those kind of things. Oil sprays are pretty effective against scale and some insects such as that. But then lastly, the one that I really wanted to mention is this here. This is called systemic houseplant insect control. This is a powder or granular product that you can apply to the soil surface right now or right before you bring the plants in for the winter. As you water, the granulars are going to sort of dissolve. It's going to get absorbed into the root system, and then it's going to get translocated. So it's going to be taken from the root system, and the chemical is going to be translocated throughout the plant. So hopefully in a matter of a couple of weeks, if we apply this to the soil, that product is going to get up and it's going to go out to all the branch tips everywhere. And that is a very effective control against mealybugs and a lot of other hard to control insects. So this is a great thing to be doing at this time of year when you're still outdoors. You can apply this. This will last for approximately 2 months in the plant, which, like I said, in about 2 months, you're going to be bringing those plants in. Of course, we tend to have more problems with insects while they're outside, and we can get that control, get it under control, and then bring them in for the winter and hopefully not have any issues there. So just a little bit there about house plants. This is also a time of year when you could at least start planning and maybe even doing some dividing of perennials. I don't like to wait until very, very late in the fall, because at that time of year the soils are going to start to cool down and we're not going to have as much root growth. So at least I'd start planning right now if there are perennials that you want to divide, if they're 3, 4, 5 years old, if the clumps are very large, if your grasses have gotten a little bit too big, things like that, you may want to start to consider dividing those perennials. I would suggest middle of September is probably a great time if you're doing really hardy plants like sedum or daylilies or hostas. You could do those right now. Those would have no problem being dug up, sliced into quarters, thirds, whatever, and then replanted. So you could start to plan that right now. Where are you going to put them? How many do you want to divide? Which ones are you going to divide this year? Are you going to give some of them away? Are you going to replant them somewhere else in the yard? Or is it just time to dig out, get rid of some unhealthy portions of the plant and start over to freshen the plant back up? So this is a great time of year to start thinking about and or doing the dividing of those perennials. I wanted to mention a bit about lawn care. At this time of year, we're getting into probably the best time of year for reseeding, overseeding, or just establishing a new lawn area. So if you have some beds that have gotten too large and you want to shrink them up, If your lawn just took it on the chin this year and you just need to do some overseeding or reseeding, this is the time of year to do that. The soil is very warm at this time of year. That will encourage the germination of the grass seed very quickly. We're starting to get some rains again, so you are going to have to do some watering. There's no doubt, but you're really going to be watering during end of August here, and then during September. October tends to be much cooler. The water needs are much lower at that time of year, but you'll get a quick establishment, and then you have the rest of September and all of October for lawn roots to develop. So this is really the prime time for lawn seeding. In fact, it's much better, in my opinion, than even earlier in the year, because early in the year the plant sprouts, it grows a little slower because the ground is still cold, and then by the time the heat of summer rolls around, or like this year, we were into a drought period already at the end of May and the first part of June. And so if you had a newly established lawn at that time of year, it was stressed out and you were probably watering like crazy because it did not have a well-developed root system yet. Whereas if we seed right now, get that lawn established during September, October, by the time the heat or dryness of May and June or June and July rolls around, that plant is going to have a really well-established root system. So as far as overseeding, reseeding, establishing new lawns, I don't think there's any better products than Jonathan Green's grass seed. We love, all of our staff loves it. We've used the Black Beauty Ultra here at the garden center. We took out some old beds that were just a little old, tired, and out of control. We took those shrubs out. It's on the backside of our parking lot. We reseeded that whole area. It has taken great. We do very little to that area. It doesn't get irrigated any longer. We did irrigate it just during the establishment period, and that's it. Really healthy lawn out there. So that's Black Beauty Ultra for full sun to partial shade. The dense shade mix here is going to be for partial shade to full shade. The thing that I like about these grasses, particularly Black Beauty Ultra, this root system will go down somewhere between 2 and 4 feet deep. That's what makes this so drought tolerant. With a 4-foot deep root system, these little hot, dry spells where you get, like even right now, we're just a little bit dry. Not a lot right here in the St. Charles or Fox Valley area. We've been in pretty good shape this year, but we're just getting a little dry again. The surface is just starting to dry out. But when you have a 4-foot deep root system, you are not worried about a little upper surface soil where it's drying out. And you've got plenty of cool soil down there as well as moisture down there. It's also naturally disease resistant, so I really like those grass seeds. This is also a wonderful time of year to start planning, not quite doing yet, aerating and or dethatching. So dethatching is the process of removing that layer of dead grass and other debris that forms right at the base of the lawn. So if these are your lawn blades, every time you mow and when leaves get chopped up and things like that, they come down in here and they form this layer of thatch. And that layer of thatch is choking or starving the root system of nutrients such as water, nutrients like nitrogen and whatnot, and also oxygen needs to get down in the soil, but that is sort of preventing that. So dethatching is the process of raking, whether manually or with a power rake or a dethatching machine, getting that thatch layer out of there. I like to do that in towards the end of September or early to middle of October is a wonderful time of year for that. As far as aerating goes, that can be done early in the springtime. I also like to do it in September, October. That way those plugs, especially if you're doing a core aerating, those plugs are going to fall apart during the winter months, and then you're good to go for the following season. So we could start thinking about that, whether you need to get on someone's schedule for aerating or dethatching, or whether you need to rent a machine or just plan a weekend that you're going to do that on your own. So start thinking about those things. Also, as far as lawn care goes, you may want to look in the lawn for invasive weeds like crabgrasses and those types of things. Some of those can easily be pulled before they go to seed. Some of them might need to be sprayed and killed and then overseed with some fresh seeds. So this would be the time of year to look at those things as well. Okay, I mentioned pruning. Again, I'm not going to go into a full detail pruning with you, but this is the time of year to prune back really fast-growing shrubs and hedges, things like privet, things like burning bush and forsythia, and a lot of those kind of things that have put on tons and tons of new growth. This is the time of year when giving them a nice haircut will be very helpful, both for the shape of the plant as well as the fullness of the plant. If you don't trim them, oftentimes you end up with a lot of foliage up at the top and not a lot down at the bottom. Most early spring blooming plants are already starting to set their flower buds, so you are going to need to be very careful and look for flower buds. For instance, on fragrant viburnum like Judd or Korean spice viburnum, they've probably already set, the older growth has set its flower buds, but the new growth, those long shoots that are out there, they haven't set any flower buds yet. So you can usually get in there and do a little bit of nice trimming on that to give it a good healthy shape. Viburnum, for the most part, like other viburnum, like arrowwood type, which is commonly used in privacy hedges, those can be trimmed back right now without any issues whatsoever. Forsythia blooms all along the stem, so those can be trimmed back right now if they've put on excessive growth. So this would be a great time of year to be doing that. In the pruning talk, whether in person or on Facebook Live, we'll go into more detail about what and when to prune and how to prune and all that good stuff. So I won't cover a lot of that today. If you've watched any of my videos, you've probably heard me say that fall is my favorite time of year for planting. So this late summer, end of August, all of September and October are really just prime planting time. That's when I do most of my planting at home, mostly because I have a little extra time on my hand, but more importantly because I don't have to be dragging a hose nearly as much out there. The warm soils encourage root growth, and the shorter days mean that the plants aren't pushing new growth and struggling for nutrients and stuff quite as much as they are earlier in the season. So it's a great time to get plants established. So this is a really great time to be thinking and planning what you're going to be doing during September and October as far as planting goes. So you can plant pretty much anything at this time of year. There's a handful of plants that we as a nursery can't dig up. So things like river birch, for instance. River birch, we have a beautiful crop of river birch in our nursery. They're ready to go. They look gorgeous, but they don't like to have their root system disturbed during the fall months. So we can't dig those up and sell them during the fall. So something like that, we would just have to wait until the following season in order to dig those and plant. But most plants, we can dig them fresh again in the fall. We have fresh crops of plants becoming available. Things that we potted up in the springtime have now had a full summer of root growth. So in the nursery world, we take a plant, say in a 1-gallon container, and move it over to a 3-gallon container, or from a little quart up to a 3-gallon. And then they need some time to grow, establish, fill out. Well, that happens throughout the summer months. So those things that were potted up in February, March, and April, before the season really got going, those were not available to sell to you all in May, June, and July, right? They were still very small, loose in the pot. But now they've had a full season of growth. Now those plants are ready to go. So fall availability is very good. Oop, there goes my paper. Fall availability is very good. We can start to fresh dig again very soon. So there's a lot of great plant material available. And then, like I mentioned, it's just a really wonderful time for planting. Thank you. So I would for sure encourage you to start planning what you're going to plant, where, etc. And if we can help you at all, let us know on that. Also a great time of year to be planning your fall bulb. So every year, I wish I had a dollar for every time a person came in the springtime asking for tulip plants, daffodil plants, etc. We do sell a handful of those pre-sprouted in little containers, but Obviously the best time of year for bulb planting, so things like the tulips and the daffodils and the big spring onions and all sorts of other, crocus and hyacinth, etc., that should be done in the fall. We generally will get our shipment of bulbs. They come directly from the Netherlands. They come over here, and we generally have them right around Labor Day. Plus or minus just a little bit is when we get them. That's not the best time of year to plant them, though, but it is the best time of year to buy them because the availability is good. So you want to be planning, where in the yard am I short on early spring color? Where would, where do I have some plants that sprout later than other plants? Some of those things like hibiscus, perennial hibiscus, we've been selling a ton of those. They're absolutely gorgeous, the big hardy hibiscus plants, but they don't do anything until typically late May. I mean, they're dormant until mid to late May, and they're really not looking like anything until late May, early June. So that's a great area. If you have perennial hibiscus, that's a great area where you could add some early spring color with daffodils or hyacinth or whatever the case may be. So those are areas that you can start to identify in your garden right now. Plan on what you want to buy. Plan on buying them around Labor Day, and then plan on planting them when the ground starts cooling down. I like early October for planting bulbs. So fall bulbs are a wonderful way to add some color. This is a great time of year to be considering doing some deep watering of your trees if you haven't recently. We have had the benefit of having some nice hard, heavy rains here over the last several weeks. But if you haven't recently, do a deep watering on your established trees. In fact, I was just out looking at my hemlock this morning, and my hemlock are showing a little bit of signs of late summer stress. They've got a little yellowing towards the interior. Most of that is just needle shed, which is pretty typical of evergreens. They're going to start shedding some of their 2, 3, or 4-year-old needles, depending upon the variety. Start shedding that out to make room for next year's spring growth. But a little bit of that is stress too, and so I know that they're ready for a good deep watering. On an established evergreen, you could run a sprinkler out there for several hours. You could throw a hose underneath the tree and just let it trickle. So on my hemlocks at home, which are deep in the shade, I'll throw the hose underneath them, let it trickle for about an hour and a half, and then move it to the next one. So I just set the timer on my phone. When it beeps, I go over and move it to the next tree. So that's a really good thing to do. On old established trees or well-established plants, I would say you could do that just like once every 3 or 4 weeks. It certainly doesn't need to be a weekly thing, but that would be an excellent thing to do, especially as we're approaching the drier fall and then winter. So specifically evergreens, I really like to think about the evergreens in September and October, because that's the time of year when they're going to be pulling lots of water in, storing water, nutrients, etc. in the root system for wintertime. And of course, evergreens hate to go into winter dry. So that's always a recipe for disaster. Anytime when we've seen excessive winter burn on evergreens, it almost always corresponds with a dry fall. So when we've had a nice, a nice cool and or rainy fall, we tend to see very little winter burn that year. When we have a dry fall, and then if the weather conditions during the winter are right, that's when we start to see winter burn. So specifically your evergreens, but trees in general, give them a good deep watering during the months of September and October. I had someone ask several weeks ago when I asked for if there's any topics that you wanted me to cover. Somebody asked about seed collecting. And that's kind of a tough topic to cover because every plant is different in terms of when the seeds are ready, what it requires, all that kind of thing. But I brought a few things here. I just thought I would touch on it a little bit, give you a few tips and whatnot. So I brought a few things as far, most of this is from my home. I got a couple different grasses. I've got some coneflower here. I actually have some Canna seeds right here, and we've got a seed pod from a common milkweed. Got some Redbud seed. We'll talk about that. We've got Here, we'll do a little game. I will give a free Wasco coffee mug to the first person to identify which type of oak this seed came from, this acorn came from. We had some really nice posts this week, courtesy of Megan and Caden here in our office on oaks. So I've got a handful of these oak acorns. And so if first person to comment on that and get it right, I'll give you a free Wasco coffee mug. I've got some Arborvitae seed here, and lastly a shagbark hickory seed there. So let's just talk about grasses real quick. First of all, as far as specifically native grasses, as far as native plants go, we're just getting into seed harvesting season. Late August and then basically most of September and early October is seed harvesting. If you're unfamiliar with it, if you're interested in it, or if you're looking for volunteer credits, opportunities, etc., I know that both the Kane County Forest Preserve as well as locally here our Campton Township Open Space, both of them have volunteer opportunities for seed collecting. So first of all, they will teach you and train you, which is just awesome. It's all hands-on, it's outside, it's great for people of all abilities and ages. And they'll provide you everything but the garden gloves. So bring a pair of garden gloves, sign up for one of those. I know Campton Township Open Space, they do Thursdays, basically I think starting, apologize, it may have actually just started this past 2 days ago, but it might be this upcoming Thursday, but then it's every Thursday all throughout the fall. So check out their Facebook page or their website, you'll find those opportunities. And I know that Kane County Forest Preserve District does the same thing. Not necessarily the same dates, but great way to learn a little bit more. But I brought a couple of native grasses over here, but both of these are ready for seed collection. In fact, the seeds are pretty much just falling off of these right now. But both of these, I would prefer to be wearing gloves right now. But both of these work very well if you just take a bucket or a can of some kind and run your hand backwards along the stem. So not out this way, that just tends to stay on the plant, but run it backwards and those seeds are just going to fall right off there and you're going to have the seed from that particular grass. That was bottle brush grass that I just had there, which is a shady grass. And then, again, same thing here. You just want to take that and generally, if you can do that very gently, then these seeds are ready for harvest. If they're falling off like that real gently when you're rubbing your hand across it, then those seeds are ready for harvest. If they're still green, if they're still holding on there, they're probably not quite ready for harvesting. So that's some of the native grasses, and like I said, we're just starting to get into that season where the native grasses are ready for seed collection. Speaking of native plants, I brought over a couple of Echinacea seed heads here. So Echinacea is coneflower. This one you can see here still has just a little bit of the purple left on it, and the seed head still has that really nice kind of orangey green color. This is not ready for collection yet and should just be left on the plant. These seeds are not quite ripe enough for that. So that's really important depending upon the type of plant. If you pick the seed too early, it's not viable yet, and you just have basically wasted your time and wasted the resources on the plant. When the seed head turns brown like this and kind of dries out, that's when it's ready to be collected. So normally what I like to do with these, I just pick off any of these older flowers that are left. So I'm just left with this. And so that's my seed head. What I like to do with these when they're brown, I collect a bunch of them, put them in a brown paper bag, let them dry out in that bag for about a week, and then put them into either a bucket like this that you can have a lid on, Folgers coffee cans, the little plastic ones, they're not cans anymore, plastic tubs or whatever you call those. They have a little sealable lid. Those work really well. Even just the plastic Ziploc containers, those work well. So you take this, you put it in a brown paper bag for a week, then you take those and you put them in your bucket or your canister, and you just, with the lid on, and just shake it like crazy. And these seeds will just fall right off. It's great. You're going to be left with a big seed head that has no seed left on it, and at the bottom of your bucket or canister, you're going to have a whole pile of coneflower seed. So that works out really nicely. So that's how you can do that with coneflowers. I picked this off of a common milkweed in our micro prairie here behind the office. This is not ready for harvest yet. I just brought it as a sample. And if I open this up, you're going to see that these seeds are not ready at all. In fact, it's very sticky in there. The seeds are not even evident in terms of being individual seed pods or anything. So we know that when these are ready, they're actually going to crack open, and there's going to be a fuzzy white or hairy white substance with a little brown seed at the bottom. And so for milkweed, that's their dispersal mechanism. When the seed cracks open, the wind will carry those little hairs, almost act like a parachute or a sail, and it's just going to start to blow around. Obviously, I'm sure many of you have seen that before. But again, collecting seed before they're ready, like this right here, this is totally useless. This will do absolutely nothing. It's not going to ripen this way. A few of them, if they were green and close to being ripe, and you pick them and let them sit, sometimes they will continue to grow or develop, I guess is probably the better word, and you may get lucky. But this, no way, this isn't even close, so that's just a waste of time now. But these are really great for collecting in about another month or so. You could collect those. As far as growing them, in terms of milkweed anyway, milkweed needs a cold period of at least 30 days. So there's something called stratification. Stratification is just the scientific term for trying to mimic the natural conditions in which that seed germinates. So in the case of milkweed, if you think about a milkweed plant, if later on in September, if that seed head, or in October, if that seed head cracks open and then it's wind dispersed, so the wind is going to start to carry those seeds all around, and that little brown disc is the seed with these little white hairs on there. And so the seed gets dispersed, it blows all over, it lands somewhere where it will sit during the winter months, and then it will start to germinate in the springtime. So it needs a period of cold for stratification. So if you just take those seed pods and you put them and collect them and bring them and put those seeds in an envelope and then plant them in the springtime, you're going to have basically a success rate of about 0. You won't have any milkweed. But if you take those and you either store them out in the garage for the winter, or if you put them in the refrigerator with what we do here, because we grow most of our, or all of our milkweed, all the different types of milkweed, we grow them from seed. And we actually take them, we put them in a Ziploc container with a slightly moist paper towel, and we just put them in the refrigerator for about a month and a half, 45 days, and that usually works great. And then we can direct sow them and get them going. So that's milkweed. All the different types are similar in terms of how they are dispersed and what the seed pods look like. The butterfly weed, which is Asclepias tuberosa, has a similar looking seed head, but it's much, much narrower. So it's not going to be quite as large, but the seeds look almost the same. Once that seed head pops open, you're going to have a hairy, kind of little white hairy seed, or little white hairy part of the seed with a little brown disc, and that's the seed itself. So the white stuff can just be kind of picked off and discarded, and the brown disc is the seed. Yeah. We have a 3-way tie. All right, we're giving out 3 mugs. So this acorn is a bur oak, and so who was our
Linda and Jacqueline.
Doug, Linda, and Jacqueline. So we'll have a Wasco mug. I don't even have my Wasco mug. I have my Crikey mug today, which is given me to my brother-in-law. So Will, if you're watching, thanks. He's British, so he gave me a Crikey mug. But the Wasco mugs, we'll have them here for you with your name on them. So I collected these acorns from the bur oak. Actually, we have a big, beautiful bur oak right near our parking lot. And just in the last 5 days or so, it has been shedding its acorns like crazy all over the parking lot, making it very nice and easy to pick up. So I go out there, I grab the acorns. Some of them still have their cap on them. Some of them have fallen out of their cap. What I like to do with these is put them in some water and let them float or sink. If they float, they probably have weevil damage and are not going to be suitable for planting. Otherwise, if they sink, then they're ready to go. Bur oak, I actually like to plant those right now and then give them about 2 weeks. If they germinate in 2 weeks, awesome. If they don't, then they are going to need about 30 to 45 days of cold stratification. But bur oaks will actually germinate at both, sometimes they'll germinate after being directly sown. So I will take some of these bur oak acorns. We'll go ahead and pot those in a little 1 gallon container, and I'll see if I can get any of them to sprout right now. And those that'll sprout, we can get them growing right away. The other ones will go into a cold frame, which is an unheated greenhouse, but it'll stay a little warmer in there than it does above the ground. Otherwise, you can just direct sow these. If you're going to do that out in your yard, if you want to take some of these acorns and just plant them all around the yard, you want them about 1/2 to 1 inch deep in the soil. You're going to for sure lose some of them to the squirrels and the chipmunks and things like that. So if you want 5 bur oaks, or if you want 100 bur oaks, you probably want to plant 5 or 10x of what you're actually wanting, because some are going to fail, some of them the squirrels are going to get, and some of the chipmunks are going to get, as well as some birds and things like that. So those are our bur oak acorns. I grabbed a seed head or a seed off of our shagbark hickory. So this actually had just fallen off while I was standing out by the tree. Shagbark hickory has a large green husk on its hickory nut. That green husk is really hard to open. If you pick it off of the tree while it's still fully green, that seed is not fully ripened yet. It may ripen if it's big and green, but what I like to do is wait for them to start to crack open, and so you'll actually see there's 4 cracks right along the edge of this seed pod, and as that husk dries out, it's going to expose the hickory nut inside, and so I like to grab those before the squirrels do, and we'll plant some of those. Hickories are notoriously difficult to transplant, so they really they don't love to be grown in the nursery. That's why you don't commonly see them here in the garden center, out with all of our other hardwood trees, things like that. We don't have hickories out there because they develop a taproot. So in fact, what oftentimes happens with shagbark hickory is a squirrel or some other animal will take this nut and will go and plant it somewhere, and for the first 1 to 3 years, you won't see anything above ground. But that doesn't mean that it didn't take. For 1 to 3 years, it will just be growing downward and developing this big, strong taproot. That's a taproot, root that grows basically straight down. That root will develop for 1 to 3 years, at which point then it will start growing up here. But if you cut that taproot, I would say upwards of 90% of the time, the tree doesn't survive. That's why we can't grow them in a nursery, cut their roots with our tree spade and put them in a root ball and try to grow or sell them. That doesn't work. So they can be grown in little root bags or pouches. That's the way that we commonly will grow them in the nursery. They're grown in a little bag, a fabric bag that allows roots to develop without being cut. And there's even some plastic containers called root maker containers, which have little holes and kind of not divisions, but sort of little tapers on them, things like that, that allow roots to develop. And then it'll air prune the outside of them. So that's a good way to grow hickories as well. Otherwise, directly plant them out in the ground somewhere, and then hope for the best in terms of the squirrels and other things not getting them. If you are doing a lot of like hickories, acorns, etc., plant skid is a wonderful deer, rabbit, and other animal repellent. I really like the granular variety of plant skid for things, seeds and nuts and bulbs. So thank you. This is plant skid. This is the granular stuff here, and this is 100% natural. It was developed. It's a Swedish formula. They developed it for keeping the reindeer off of seedlings in the forest, etc. The U.S. Forest Department has adopted it. It's a great product. Now it's made in the USA. And we sell this. It's a great product, but you can sprinkle this right on. If you're planting tulips or daffodils, you can sprinkle it right on there in the hole and on the surface. You can do the same thing for hickories and oaks and walnuts and all that kind of stuff too. So that's a great product. I brought some Redbud Seeds here, and I don't know how well you can see this, but if I hold this up to the light, I can see in this seed pod, almost looks like a pea, right? And if I hold it up to the light, I can see that there's 3 looks like brown seeds in there. So if I open it up, they're green with a little bit of brown on them. And I'm sure that is virtually impossible for you all to see, but this is green still. And these seed pods are green. These are not ready by any means yet. I just picked them off to show you. But on Eastern Redbud, which is a native tree here and a wonderful understory tree, great for full sun to mostly shade, I like to leave these on the tree. This outer green section is going to turn kind of a straw color, like a golden brown, whatever, and is going to become very thin like paper. And the seeds will continue to develop and will harden up and will turn kind of a blackish brownish color. At that point, those seeds are ready for collection. So we'll leave those on the tree for another probably 6 weeks. They will dry on the tree, and then we'll be able to take those off and harvest them. Redbud also needs a cold period, so generally we'll keep those in the refrigerator, or we'll just go ahead and put them into a seed tray. We'll put some soil in there, we'll put the seeds in there, and then we'll put that into one of the unheated greenhouses for the winter where they can just grow out there. And then possibly we'll take that tray of Redbud seeds out of the unheated greenhouse and put it into a heated greenhouse early in the season, just to get a jump start on the year. So if we collect these and seed the trays in October or November, we could take that tray out in January or early February, bring that into a lower heat greenhouse. You don't want to just take it, from say 20 or 30 degrees into a 70 or 80 degree house or greenhouse. That's not going to work. So you could bring it into a lower house or an area like a sunroom where it's cool but warmer than outside, and you can start to get them to go a little earlier so you get a jump on the growing season. So that's Redbuds. Great plant just to take these seed pods and distribute them into, if you have a wooded area or something like that, that's a great thing to do. And then lastly, at least for today, I brought some seed heads from Canna. I've collected these before at home from my Canna, so I wanted to bring this because I have, there's a green seed head on here which is not at all ripe, but then there's this other one over here which is already starting to crack open. You can see it's kind of cracked open in there, and if I shake it, it rattles. So that one's ready to go, and I can just pick that off, and generally if I just squeeze hard enough, the outer shell comes off, and I'm left with this very hard, almost rock-like seed. And so those seeds can then be kept and grown in the springtime. I find that these work best if I soak them in water for a period of about 24 hours before I plant them. Or even if you take, I know it seems crazy, but this outer shell is so hard that it sometimes needs a little extra help. So you can actually take a hacksaw blade and very finely cut a little groove along the outside of it. It's almost like a shell. And then you can soak them in water and then plant them. So those are the Canna seeds there. But every seed needs something different. That's why I say I didn't want to, there's no hard and fast rule about that. Plants are really cool organisms, and some of them have very unique conditions in which they grow. So I didn't bring any here, but some plants need extreme heat. So things like lodgepole pine, which you can grow in Illinois but doesn't naturally grow here. But lodgepole pine grows in the Rocky Mountains from Colorado and then all the way up into Alberta and British Columbia. That would be its native range. But lodgepole pine is what we would call a pyrophyte. pyrophytic plants need extreme heat in order to get that seed capsule open. So in the case of a pyrophytic plant like a lodgepole pine, the seed is coated with entirely coated with resin, and that resin has to literally melt away before that seed is exposed. So oftentimes these seeds will fall down and they will land on the ground, and they will be buried by an animal trampling on it, or just years of debris and stuff going on top of it, and they'll be down in there, and then there's a forest fire, and that seed capsule is cracked open from that extreme heat, and then that resin is melted away, and then that plant is able to start growing. Some of our prairie plants are the same way. That's why we have prairie fires out here to get some of those seeds going. So they're like I say, every plant is different. So if you have a particular plant that you're trying to grow, just go on to one of the better resources is just to go on to Google and then type in the type of plant you're looking for, and then seed stratification. So Redbud seed stratification, or bur oak seed stratification. And a lot of the universities, you're not going to want to trust Bill and Jane's Garden necessarily. They might know what they're talking about, but a lot of the universities have wonderful information out there. And so if you type that in, oftentimes what'll come up either is like the Forest Service, or University of Illinois, or Cornell, etc. So those are going to be great resources for you. The other thing you could do, especially for trees and shrubs, there's a wonderful book it's called The Manual of Woody Landscape Plants. It was written by Michael Durr. It is certainly where I got the vast majority of my horticultural knowledge from. I just read that book cover to cover when I was a kid. And that's a wonderful resource for propagation of plants. At the end of every plant section, it's going to tell you his experience. He was a university professor. It'll tell you his experience in propagating all of those plants, what worked best, all the different things that he's tried, that type of thing. So really, that's a great thing too if you're really getting serious about it. So just a quick seed harvest 101. Of course, you can collect seed from things like your peppers and your tomatoes. You can collect seed from our native prairie plants, many of our trees. You just have to know what the right conditions and when to collect the seed and what to look for. The other thing that I did want to mention, just in terms of seed harvesting, it's important because like I mentioned coneflower already. So I brought 2 coneflowers up here. This yellow one here is actually a cool one. This is called Cheyenne Spirit. And Cheyenne Spirit, you're going to get either a yellow, an orange, or a red flower, occasionally even a purple flower on it. So it's kind of like a weird mix. But when you collect the seed from this, it is not going to be a Cheyenne Spirit coneflower any longer. It may have some of the genetic characteristics of Cheyenne Spirit, but it's going to be a seed-grown plant. There's going to be genetic variation. You may end up with a really cool coneflower. You may end up with a total dud. You really don't know, and that's kind of one of the fun things about gardening and science and propagation. You may stumble upon the next cool thing, or it might just be an exercise in futility. You never know. This is another one here. This is called Butterfly Kisses. Butterfly Kisses coneflower is pink and has this very fuzzy center. Again, the seeds from this may exhibit some of these fuzzy center characteristics, but it may not. It might be really short, it might be really tall, it might be very purple, it might be yellow or pink, you just don't know. And that's the way we get a lot of our selections for plants like this is from seed beds. So seeds, there's multiple plants, the pollen is collected from one plant and transferred to the next, and then seeds are collected and then sown, and then in the seed bed we watch them and say, hey, that one's kind of cool, this one's kind of neat. Sometimes that happens naturally, and sometimes it's very specific. Sometimes in the case of like daylily breeding, I think in the past I've mentioned my good friend Steve Todd, who's a daylily breeder. Well, Steve will literally take the pollen from one plant and transfer it to another plant, and he will note exactly what seed or what plant he's transferring the pollen from and to, and when it was done, and he'll mark that particular seed head, and it might be protected by a little mesh bag. That's a great way to collect seed if you need to, or if you're trying to prevent a particular flower from being pollinated by the bees or the flies or whatever the case may be. You put a little mesh bag over it so that your cross is secure. So kind of some neat stuff there, or you could just leave it up to chance and see what happens. So that's my seed collecting 101. The last thing that I wanted to talk about before I open it up for questions is fall veggies. This is a great time of year. Obviously, like at home, my garden is overflowing with tomatoes and peppers and things like that. All of those warm season plants are really producing heavily right now. We're picking many pounds of tomatoes per day, more than we could possibly eat. But we're just getting into that time of year when it's time for sowing or getting ready for sowing our cold season crops. So I just brought a couple up here. We just got a fresh pack or fresh order of seeds in. So we are ready. These aren't seeds that were left over from last year. This is a fresh crop. So these are actually packaged for 2022, but are ready to go right now. If you wanted to sow lettuce or bok choy or cabbage or kale or a lot of those kind of things. So some of the cold crops, I just jotted down a quick list, and I'm just going to run through these. Kale, lettuce, arugula, spinach, Swiss chard, bok choy, cabbage, broccoli, carrots, cauliflower, radishes, bunching onions. Those are all things that can be late summer sown for a fall harvest. So those are cold crop plants. All of those are available in seeds and are pretty easy to grow direct sown, meaning you just sow those seeds right into the ground. You don't have to start them in the house or start them in a container. All those can all be direct sown in the garden. I also brought a pack of basil seeds because a lot of people that I've spoken to have said, man, my basil's looking pretty nasty. Yeah, it's kind of the end of the summer. If you had a spring sown basil and you've been harvesting it all year, and then with just the heat and things like that, you may be getting some mildews and just the plant is kind of old and tired and it's done its job. Well, you can plant another round. Now, this is not a cold crop. It germinates very quickly, and you can get some fresh basil for fall, but you will have to bring this in when the temperatures get below 50 degrees. I don't know how many we have left, but I know we just sowed, a couple weeks ago, we sowed another crop of basil so that people would have them. So we have some of those available in little 4-inch pots that are already growing and whatnot. So you can do that with basil and a lot of other herbs as well, and then just plan on bringing those in before it gets cold. So another thing that you can plan on. So Megan, do we have any questions at all that we need to answer?
No, not that you hadn't already.
Okay, sounds like we've answered all the questions. So as always, though, if you're not watching this live and you are watching this later on in the day and you find some questions, feel free to put those in the comment section. We try to get to those as quickly as we can. Of course, you can always stop in the store here and ask us questions, or send them to us via email, sales@wasconursery.com, or you can even text pictures, questions, etc. to our main phone number here. We love to try and help. We love to educate, and we have a lot of really experienced and educated folks here that can help you with a wide variety of topics. So as always, use us as a resource. We'd love for you to stop in the store. Our fall collection stuff is ready. Our mums and pansies and ornamental peppers and fall grasses and all that stuff are looking absolutely gorgeous. So if it's time to give up on the summer, the petunias and the salvia and all those kind of things that are maybe looking tired, we have a great selection of fall annuals for you as well. Cabbages, kales, coneflowers, rudbeckias, etc. So got lots of color out here. So as always, if there's something we can help, just let us know. Thanks again for watching. Take care.